Good morning, and welcome to the latest episode of National Security Space Association's SpaceTime interview series. My name is Chris Williams, and I serve as chair of the association's Mormon Center for Space Studies. Today, we're privileged to hear from Colonel Eric Felt, commander of the Phillips Research Site and director of the Air Force Research Laboratory's Space Vehicles Directorate at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. Colonel Felt, welcome. But before turning to Colonel Felt, I have the great pleasure of introducing Mr. Doug Loverro, who will serve as moderator of today's event. As many of you know, during his distinguished career, Doug served in various key technical and acquisition positions in the U.S. Air Force and the National Reconnaissance Office. Following his retirement from active duty as a colonel, he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy and as Associate Administrator for NASA's Human Spaceflight Program. We're thrilled to have Doug as an active member of NSSA's Board of Advisors. We look to our Board of Advisors, comprised of distinguished former senior military and civilian officials, whose rich experience ranges across the national security space enterprise, from DoD to the intelligence community to industry, for expert insights and analysis. Doug and other advisors contribute mightily to the work of the association and the Mormon Center in particular. Doug was also deeply involved in discussions dating back over 2 years regarding the need for an association focused solely on national security space. And he had a strong hand in the stand-up of the association. Doug, thanks very much for your continued strong support to the association. And now it's over to you for the formal introduction of Colonel Felt and leading the Q&A today. Thank you very much. Doug?
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for that introduction. You know, anytime anybody tells me that I'm a distinguished former, I just think you should put those together and call it extinguished member of the Space Force. So, listen, thank you for NSSA for allowing me to introduce my good friend and colleague, Eric Felt. Eric, welcome. And if you don't mind, Eric, before I go to this formal introduction, I'm going to point out what you just said. On Eric's shirt today, is his first day wearing the emblem of the Space Force, which he joined recently. So that's fantastic. I'm so glad that you were able to join the Space Force, Eric. I think the Space Force is going to be better for that. For those of you who don't know him, Colonel Felt is the commander of the Phillips Research Site, which many of us used to know as the Weapons Laboratory, but is now the Phillips Research Site, and the director of the Air Force Research Lab Space Vehicles Directorate. Down at Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico. There he leads a team of over 1,000 military, civilian, on-site contractors who basically do military space science and technology, research and development, advanced technologies, integration, and demonstration. And Eric has been there, I think, almost 3 years now, Eric, is that right?
So yes, sir.
And I have the privilege of serving on Eric's independent advisory team, which has been fantastic and keeps us plugged into what's going on there. Eric received his commission in 1991 from Duke University, ROTC, but he didn't go directly in the Air Force. He went to UCal Berkeley, which is the lesser of 2 schools in Northern California, where he got his master's and then his PhD in EE. He entered into active duty in 1996. Eric is also a distinguished graduate of the Air Force Test Pilot School, which, given the qualifications to just get into test pilot school, truly makes him one of the best of the best. While I was looking over Eric's biography, I noted that, like me, his first several assignments were not on the space side of the Air Force, but in fact were on the flight test side of the Air Force. But in 2004, he joined the NRO, and like the rest of us, I think he got hooked. I think that's where I met Eric first. Now, he was over in the SIGINT Tower. I was in the Inman Tower, which, for those of you who have been there, know it's like being on 2 sides of the world. So we didn't see each other much. But from there, he moved after school. He moved to the operationally responsive space program element job at the Pentagon. And that's really where I got to know him. And that assignment led directly to his tour at Kirtland Air Force Base, where he led the Air Force's operationally responsive ORS Satellite 1 development, the first ORS satellite that we developed in the Air Force at the time, and a task that he and I collaborated on a lot. It was a great time. In less than 3 years from contract award, we launched that satellite in 2011 and proved the value of tactical ISR for CENTCOM, and Eric is the guy who made that happen. There's no question about it. He did a fantastic job, and he has been an exceptional proponent for space power and a good friend for many, many years. Our format today is pretty simple. Eric will make some opening remarks, and then we'll turn to Q&A. For the audience, if you have any questions for Eric, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And without further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome my longtime friend and colleague, Colonel Eric Felt. Eric, over to you.
All right. Good morning, sir. Good morning, audience. Thanks for the great introduction. Despite all that past, which has been very exciting, in my mind, there's no time like right now to be working in the space business and to be working on space science and technology, because there's so many new things happening, and that makes it a very dynamic time, and there's so many opportunities, and it's important for us to take those opportunities and make sure that we're delivering the capabilities and science and technology developments that our nation needs to keep us ahead of our adversaries in space. I think we've witnessed on the U.S. government side of things a remarkable pivot towards China since the new National Defense Strategy came out there in 2018. And I've certainly seen it here in my directorate and orchestrated it here within my directorate to make sure that we are working on the highest payoff things to keep us ahead of our adversaries and make sure that we're delivering the best capabilities for the future that we need. One of the challenges is that there's so many opportunities out there and so many things to choose from. So that makes it a great time for us to be working in this field, and a great, very important for us to be successful in what we're doing. So I think this has been a wonderful time to be working in the space enterprise, and I am very happy to be here in what I consider my dream job, working on space science and technology, make sure that we are inventing the future and inventing great technologies that our warfighters need. So I look forward to the dialogue today, and I do cherish our long history together, sir. And it's been a great fun, and we got a long ways to go in the future.
Oh, great, Eric. That's fantastic. Let me, if you're okay, let me open up with a couple of questions, and hopefully we'll get some audience questions at the time. Let me start out pretty general, if I could. So, and the question is, how does the Space Vehicles Directorate decide what R&D projects to pursue? What's the process that you go through to decide what to work on? How much of that is affected by the user community, by the Space Force, by U.S. Space Command, by internal interests within your team? Maybe you could educate those of us or those of the folks who are listening who haven't been part of it. How does that whole process work?
That's a great question. That's a really important part of what we do, because as I mentioned, there are thousands of opportunities, and we cannot and are not going to be able to pursue everything. So it's important that we pursue the right things. And we spend a lot of time actually in this strategic planning process. The basic construct that we use is cost versus utility analysis, where you can imagine a chart, and we create a chart with utility on the y-axis and cost on the x-axis, and then we plot all of our opportunities on there, and we try to direct our resources towards the highest payoff or highest ROI opportunities that are on there. Now, that's easy to say, but the devil is in the details of how you do that, and I'll explain a little bit about some of the decisions that we made along the way. First of all, it's hard to measure utility, all right? So I mean, as much as I wish we could actually have a pure analysis and objective proof of exactly how future conflicts in space would be deterred or won, that would be great, but we don't have that. So we do try to use as much analysis as we can. The measure of utility that I directed our team to use was deterring conflict with China in 2030. All right, so there's a timeline in there, there's a pacing adversary in there, and deterrence being our key thing. And deterrence comes from strength and from knowing that your adversary's calculations are going to lead them to not escalating a conflict into space. So that's our objective. What we're trying to do is develop the technologies that are going to maximize that objective as best we can. And then in terms of cost, we look at the cost to mature things up to TRL 6, where the SPO is going to be ready to transition those into an operational capability. And so then we end up with a bunch of dots plotted on this chart, and the location of the dots we get from a collaborative analysis and critical thinking process between my SMEs in each area, and I have a mission lead in each area that it's specifically their job to go out and look for these opportunities and analyze them. and the users and the SPO and industry. And there's a lot of inputs that get synthesized together in determining, what the utility and cost of a specific dot is. And then I find that drives some great dialogue. Once people see the chart, they're like, well, my little pet project is surely not that expensive. Let me go find you some funding partners and bring that dot over to the left. Or you're underestimating the utility of my idea. Let me show you how it's greater. Those are all really productive discussions. So that's the basic framework. We conduct that on an approximately annual basis, and that's how we allocate our money. And I will assure you that there are a lot of dots on there that just don't get funded, but I'm pretty confident that we are investing our money in the highest payoff opportunities that are out there in the science and technology area because of this process.
You mentioned, Eric, that there are a lot of folks where you actually can partner with other organizations. You go search for partners for it. And there's a long list of organizations that conduct R&D on national security space, obviously AFRL, Space Development Agency, MDA, DIU, Space RCO, blah, blah, blah. There's probably 10 more on that list, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys have we know that on sort of the system development side of space, General Thompson previously, and now General Gutlein, when he gets out there, lead a program integration council to kind of go ahead and coordinate. Is there an equivalent in the R&D space about how you coordinate your work?
There is. We have the Space Community of Interest, and the purpose of that is really to make sure that we know what each other is doing, so that we can identify opportunities for collaboration and eliminate duplication. And the key thing there is not that we would prevent anybody from pursuing what is in their best interest to pursue, but that we are aware of what each other are doing. I kind of think of it as controlled chaos, and the other way I think of it is that it is the American way to embrace competition and competition of ideas, even within the government, and to sometimes you can't, especially on the science and technology side, which is different from the large, when you're executing a large program, you need to have a number of different lines of effort in the fire because you don't necessarily know which ones are going to work out. And so I think that controlled chaos is the way to go. It really pulls out the best in the competition within industry, the competition within the government, and leads to the best innovation and the best new ideas. So we don't want duplication, but we also don't want a overburdensome bureaucracy where, to start one little $100,000 project, I have to go ask, 4 layers of management, and that's going to take 6 months. That would be terrible for U.S. innovation. So we've tried to balance those things. And again, our thought is, let's be aware of what everybody in this community is doing, and then let's embrace pursuing multiple good ideas across these different agencies, and let's see where it takes us.
Got it. You mentioned when I asked you about how do you decide on things, you said you actually use a metric, which is how does this help us defeat the Chinese threat in 2030, which I think is a fantastic metric. But clearly, as you know, and as all of the folks on this call know, foreign counter space threats continue to expand in numbers and types and sophistication. Which for you, and you might not be able to answer this, maybe this is a classified question, but we'll ask it anyway, and you can dodge if you need to. Which of the threats worry you the most, and what are you doing in general to stay ahead of those kind of threats? And if you don't want to connect what you're doing to a specific threat, maybe you can just tell us some of the things that you can tell us. Obviously, I know a lot of things you're doing are classified, but for those things you can tell us how you're what are those threats that you're most worried about, and how are you approaching the threats from a scientific perspective?
It's a super good question. And I think I'm going to answer that by saying that the threats that worry me the most are the surprises. All right. So surprises come in different forms. It can come in tactically in, gee, I did not know that Chinese satellite was there at that point in time and doing this to my satellite. Of course, that's a very tactical surprise and a tactical threat, and that does worry me. But there's also strategic threats where, I didn't anticipate that our adversary was going to move so fast in this area, and gee, before you know it, they've got a colony on the south pole of the moon, and have captured a great strategic advantage that we did not effectively counter. Those kind of strategic surprises and threats are also of concern to me. So what I can do in the lab and on the science and technology side is try to counter those, and try to counter those with technology, especially. So in the tactical side of things, you can imagine better space domain awareness sensors on the ground, in space, to always, the vision here is to know everything, everywhere, all the time, in real time. And so if you parse out each of those clauses, you want to know everything, and really that means everything of interest, everywhere. You need to be able to not have them go to an area where we can't observe what their activities, all the time. You never know when they're going to do something nefarious, and in real time, because you need to have real-time warning. So those 4 factors drive the architecture that you need in space domain awareness, as well as in ISR if you're looking at the Earth. And so technologies that improve those 4 areas are really where our focus is, to avoid tactical surprise. And then that can inform the future architecture that the SWAC and the SSC choose to build out for our operational architecture to provide to our users. So that's on the tactical side. But I also have a role on the strategic side to be out there as kind of the art of the possible and the horizon scanning experts to look at, hey, what things are we going to be able to do in the future in space that are going to be very important, that we might not be doing today, that we need to get started on the science and technology for those things. That's another part of avoiding future strategic surprise, and making sure that we're having an informed discussion and not just stumbling our way into a future that we don't like. I view that also as a really important way that the lab can contribute to the discussion in our nation on what we should be doing in space, 5 to 15 years out, not just tonight. So I don't like surprises. I think I can use technology to counter those surprises, both tactically and strategically, and that's what I strive to do.
Got it. It's interesting when you talk about the future and where we're going to be in many years. Many of the folks on this call were on a classified presentation that NSSA put on just about 2 weeks ago, where folks were talking about how we're addressing the threat. And one of the things that I heard remarked during that presentation was we seem to be chasing the threat as opposed to leapfrogging over the threat. And it sounds like to me, what you're talking about there is leapfrogging over the threat. Is that sort of the basis for the CHIPS program and the things that you're doing in cislunar space?
Yes, that is exactly what we're trying to do. I don't like being in the responding mode where we always have urgent needs because somebody did something that we could have seen coming 10 years ago, but nobody paid enough attention to. That's bad. That's where we don't want to be. So, I mean, focusing on resilience, that's a good thing to do. Having a robust science and technology pipeline, that's a great way to counter threats and surprises, because then you actually have some technology that is almost ready to, when you do have an urgent need, to respond to those urgent needs. Otherwise, you're starting from scratch. And then agility, having some agility in your S&T processes, and perhaps more importantly today, in your acquisition processes, to adjust to unexpected things that might happen. Those are things that we can do to try to leapfrog ahead, rather than always just chasing what our adversary is doing. And I do think our CHIPS program is a great example of how we're trying to do that in cislunar space. We can clearly see that there's an increasing activity, commercial, other nation states in the cislunar sphere, meaning the moon, areas around the moon, in fact, the whole 4 pi steradians, at least out to the moon's radius and a little bit beyond. So there's a lot going on out there in the future. And we need to be able to at least have space domain awareness of what's going on out there. It's very challenging because the distance of the moon is 10 times the distance of the geobelt, and we already have trouble figuring out exactly what's going on in the geobelt. So you can imagine how difficult it's going to be. On top of that, you've got the moon is bright, and so it's hard to see things that are right in the cone of shame, as we call it, that's surrounding the moon. So there's a lot of technology problems that we can envision in the future, when the Space Force needs to protect and defend the space lines of commerce, and those lines of commerce extend to the moon and beyond. There's a lot of technology that we're going to need to be able to do that. So that's my thought, is that the lab can get after that right now, developing those basic technologies that we think our Space Force is going to need a few years down the road to operate in the cislunar sphere.
Mhm. So I heard you say the cone of shame. It sounds like more like a walk of shame or an orbit of shame, actually. Um, and by the way, you and I both used the acronym CHIPS, but we didn't say what that stood for. Can you tell the audience what it stands for?
Absolutely. That's the Cislunar Highway Patrol System. And of course, it's named after a great TV show from the 70s called CHIPS.
And is one of the first satellites going to be called Estevez or not?
Yes,
So
actually.
that just shows what nerds we are. Okay, you mentioned earlier the SWAC, the Space Warfare Analysis Center, which is being stood up, presuming that Congress and the Space Force can agree on it. How do you see the SWAC changing how you decide what to invest in and how it affects AFRL?
A couple different ways. I do think having an architect that is, at the Space Force level, like the SWAC has been set up to do, is very important, and that they're doing analytical work to determine what the future architecture should be, to, when necessary, counter the inertia of just continuing what we're doing today. So the function is extremely important, and being able to make data-driven decisions on what is the best future architecture to enhance the resilience and remain agile to respond to these unexpected threats that I talked about. Function is super important. I actually saw that function was performed very well at the National Reconnaissance Office when I was there, and I think that's a great model for what we need to do in the Space Force as well, in terms of that rigor of analysis and that kind of thought going into what the future architecture should be and what the trade space looks like, and what the options are. So my roles in working with the SWAC, and we do collaborate very extensively with them, is a couple-fold. First of all, I already mentioned we're the art of the possible people. So it's our job to envision that, hey, you might want to think about a future where you have a lot more optical communication instead of RF communication, as one example. But every little mission area has different technologies that are now maturing and able to be employed in space that weren't there before when the previous architecture work was done. So being the art of the possible people and being able to assess what are the new ideas and what are the potential value of these new ideas, that's important. And that's something that we can bring to the SWAC for their analytical purposes. And then the other thing that we can do for the SWAC is help them test their hypotheses. So as they come up with a new architecture, let's say they decide that missile warning should be done from LEO instead of GEO, just as a random example. Well, there are going to be risks in doing this in a new way, and those risks and hypotheses and assumptions might need to be tested by the lab before you would want to make a big architectural shift in the operational architecture. So we can do those kinds of hypothesis testing and risk reduction activities prior to the moves in the big operational architecture. So those are at least two ways that I think the lab can collaborate very effectively with the very important functions that the SWAC is performing for the Space Force.
When you think about that second example, for example, about moving missile warning to LEO, would one such program be the NTS program that AFRL has been working on? I think you have a specific name for those kind of programs, like a marquee program, but that's not the right word. But is that kind of what Vanguard program? Thank you.
Right. So Navigation Technology Satellite 3 is one of the first 3 Department of the Air Force Vanguard programs. So what that means is that this is a technology that we think is so promising that the department is going to make an extra effort, not only to develop it, but to then transition it into operational capability when it's ready. So that's what distinguishes a Vanguard program. And they're few in number because they're the most important to transition with some extra commitment behind them at the department level. So NTS-3 became a Vanguard program back in 2019. And really the name comes from Navigation Technology Satellites 1 and 2 flew in the 70s and led to GPS. And so again, this is some significant advances in technology for position navigation and timing that we think it's going to give us a decisive advantage against our adversaries in that mission area. So we're going to fly this satellite. It's going to be a demonstration satellite in GEO. It's going to have a software-defined radio on it, and it's going to have phased array antenna on it so that the power can be directed where it's needed. That's going to enable a whole slew of new possibilities in how we do PNT. And what we want to do is we have 130 experiments planned. We're going to run through those, see which ones provide us the greatest advantage in defeating the threats that are facing us, primarily jammers in that area. And then when we have conducted all that, we'll be able to analyze, hey, what's the best way to transition this technology? And there's various options. Of course, you could, and we will, I'm sure, roll some of these technologies into the GPS program of record in MEO, but you can also envision our augmentation layers in GEO or LEO that might provide some advantages to selected users rather than the worldwide community. There's all kinds of things that need to be analyzed, and that's where the SWAC will help us as we show them what the technology can do. They will then be able to make the architectural level trades to say, hey, what should our future PNT architecture look like? And then the Space Force can, once they know what that answer is, drive towards that future. So that's a great example of how it all links together.
Fantastic, fantastic. You know, your comments about leading into that next set of programs or program of record inputs leads to, of course, the question that many people on this call are interested in, which is opportunities. You know, what are the available and upcoming opportunities, some of which they may know about already, some of which they don't know about. And I know I don't want to put you on the spot and get you in trouble with your contracting officer, but what are the you know, it's you either get in trouble with your security officer or your contracting officer, one of these things, and maybe both at the same time. But what are some of the big opportunities that you would have industry look out for as we move forward into the 22 and 23 timeframe?
Yeah, I think the most important thing there is, of course, watch the beta.sam website and see what we publish out there. And it was not just RFPs, but RFIs and things like that too, because industry has a chance to influence what our acquisition strategies are going to be. I think the other important thing is that there aren't just a couple opportunities. There's literally hundreds of opportunities, because a lot of our efforts are in the 6.2 area, especially the earlier development phases are smaller exploratory efforts. And there are a lot of possibilities there that we want to investigate. It's like, you know, growing a garden where you're trying a lot of different things, and some of the plants are going to grow better than others, and then you're going to weed those out. So there's a lot of opportunities, not just a couple. And then the third point about that, I would say, is that I did select 2 new flight experiments last year. You know, one of them is in very low Earth orbit, VLEO, where you have to be constantly thrusting to even stay in orbit. And the thought, that's called precise, and the thought there is, hey, that's an orbital regime that might be very useful to the Space Force in the future. Let's make sure we can operate in that regime. And by the way, there's some things that you need to be in that regime to do, such as ionospheric modification. And so that might be a good place to start. And that's what precise is all about. So let's open up that regime. Then let's open up the cislunar regime. So the CHIPS program gets after space domain awareness in the cislunar regime, where you do have to be in orbit to get full awareness of what's out there. We've worked with the SWAC on that already a lot in terms of what should the SDA architecture look like if we do care about that cislunar space. And one of the key findings there is that you have to be in cislunar space to know what's going on in cislunar space because of the cone of shame and the distances involved. So that's our second program is, hey, how do we operate above GEO in the cislunar space, and especially to maintain space domain awareness about what's going on there. So that's our second major flight program that we announced last year. So you can expect in both of those to have some opportunities posted for partnering and collaboration. We are in general kind of moving away from the model of selecting, you know, one prime to do the whole project. Instead, we found it very effective to do some of the integration ourselves with it. We do have great experts here in the lab, and, you know, by this piece that way, by this piece that way, and that gives us more knowledge of the overall system that then helps us to better operationalize the capabilities. So I would say that is the model that we're going for in the future, which again leads us, I think, to a great place in terms of having lots of opportunities for lots of different players, both traditional and non-traditional, to be involved in these space projects. And finally, I would offer that some of the most important opportunities are, of course, not things I'm publishing on SAM site, but they're the commercial opportunities, because 80% of the innovation in space is happening on the commercial side of things. So companies that can find a commercial business model and put a new product out there that has commercial customers, that's a lot of our future too, because we would like to partner with those people and go buy their product and service rather than develop it ourselves. So I would predict that a lot of our future dollars in the lab and in the Space Force are going to actually be going that route. So don't just look for business opportunities from the government, look for ideas that are going to have commercial appeal, develop these commercial products, and then I think that in the future, as we build out the hybrid architecture, for resiliency and cost purposes, that there will be government purchase of those things after they are developed with commercial appeal. So that's really the future that I see. And that's why I can't point to one big RFP that's coming out later this year. Instead, that's the whole environment in which we operate today.
Mm-hmm. Bringing up commercial is an interesting point. Obviously, the Space Development Agency leverages sort of a lot of commercial space builders to build their stuff. The NRO obviously has the Commercial Space Project Office to go ahead and get commercial imagery and other commercial ISR services. And the Space Force doesn't seem to have a center of that right now established. How do you and obviously the Space Force is new and it's growing and it's developing, and you're going to have a new commander of Space Systems Command very soon, General Mike Gutlein, who's also a fantastic friend and a great leader. How would you recommend the Space Force gets their arms around some sort of a better, more disciplined way of approaching commercial space?
Well, the Space Force does have such an office. It's the Commercial SATCOM office, all right? And so they've been buying commercial SATCOM very effectively for many, many years. And so I really applaud the recent decision to expand the scope of their effort to purchasing other commercial products and services beyond just SATCOM. So if and when we do venture into tactical ISR, for example, that it would be a good office that could do that on behalf of the Space Force, because they already have experience with buying commercial products and services. And it seems clear to me that as we move towards the hybrid architecture, and there are much more commercial products and services that can be bought at very competitive and compelling price points and resiliency attributes that they add to the architecture, that there's going to be more of that. And so that office as a starting point, I think, is a great place to start for buying more of that. And then you get into a nice rapid cycle of evolving the technology where you can buy a little, do some experiments, see what the shortfalls are, and evolve the capability, buy some more. That's a very good business model for us to be in, because rather than having to wait 10, 15 years to iterate on your capabilities. So I think there's going to be a lot more of that. I think that office is a great place to start. I have found that office to be very a good transition partner for me, in that they are very interested in developing new technology and transitioning new technologies that come out of the lab or labs partnerships with industry into operational capabilities. So I do think the Space Force is not as mature as the NRO in that regard, and I do really embrace the NRO's philosophy that, hey, we will buy what we can and build only what we must. That's the same philosophy as the Space Force. But then this office can be the starting point for how to implement that that part of the hybrid architecture.
It's interesting you should say that. As we sit out here outside in industry and look at what's happening, and at least from my knothole, the perspective I see is we have commercial launch being bought by the Launch Program Office, commercial SSA being purchased by sort of the SP side of things, as you said, commercial SATCOM by the Claire Grayson's office from DISA, and now she's been given the responsibility for ISR. And then, of course, there's this other organization under Tim Trujillo at SMC that's doing commercial. But you see it as sort of all coming together eventually into a single office. Is that what I'm hearing you say, Eric?
I'm not saying it's coming together into a single office. What I'm saying is that we do have some pockets, and you're right, it's not just that one, but we do have some pockets of experience with buying commercial goods and services. As more of those become available, I think all of those will will grow, and we are going to see more of that in the hybrid architecture, just because it makes so much sense from the attributes that we're trying to get towards, which is, you know, a more resilient architecture, a more agile capability where we can rapidly pivot to unexpected surprises, and a cost-effective architecture. So as we move towards those things, and there's more commercial offerings out there, I think all of those will grow. I don't see all of those necessarily coming together. And again, going back to a little bit of controlled chaos can be in our best interest. I don't think it would be necessarily a good thing to insist that all of those be consolidated in one office. But that doesn't mean they're not coordinated. It doesn't mean they're not aware of what each other's doing. It doesn't mean there isn't a logical approach to bringing more commercial into the hybrid architecture.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. You know, one of the things that obviously is necessary in order to empower everything that you're talking about is people, right? And I think you and I both agree that mentoring and raising people is a critically important thing. And in fact, NSSA has been very active in working with the Space Force S1 in figuring out how do we work with people. But what do you see as the challenges? How well are we doing at attracting the right folks? Do we have a good pipeline? Do we have what we need? How do we get better at that?
I do think the size and ensuring a super high quality of the STEM workforce in our nation and the pipeline to continue that, that is one of my most concerning long-term threats to our continued good work in this area. So I am very concerned about the STEM workforce. I do think we need more efforts in that area. I have found that all of this commercial space renaissance that's happening has really re-energized a lot of the youth to want to work in space again. It's kind of like the 60s all over again, where a lot more people are willing and eager to come study in this area, and that's wonderful. So I think we just need to keep that going. I think that with that level of excitement and all of the innovation that's happening, all the commercial successes that are happening, you know, if we could have 5 more Richard Bransons going to space, and I don't just mean that one thing, but I mean that level of significant commercial activity, I think we'll be fine workforce wise, but not without some deliberate efforts to make sure that we're doing it. I will tell you, for when I have vacancies in the lab and I'm recruiting new applicants, I'm getting great quality. The quality is really good. So I'm encouraged by that. I do think we need to pay attention to it and keep maturing it. I have a program that I love that we've been doing for 20 years called the University Nanosat program, which funds universities to build small satellites so people can get students can get some hands-on experience in doing this. It's a competitive thing where the universities have to bid their ideas, and that leads to great innovation in and of itself. And you know, we have an event coming up later this month where we're going to select the next cohort of University Nanosat program, satellites that are going to be built. So more things like that, I think, will help us. Working closely with NASA, who's also very interested, of course, in the STEM workforce and making sure we have a great space workforce, and the commercial side of things, because they're dependent on this STEM pipeline as well, I think is the key. So there's no easy answers, there's no silver bullets, but I am encouraged by what I've seen so far, and I think some deliberate efforts in that way will be okay.
Excellent. Let me ask you to think back over the last 3 years or so, and maybe for things that are happening or going to be happening in the next year or two. What do you view as some of the greatest accomplishments that you think has happened in SV, in your time there, and the things that you really are passionate about?
It's a great question, because I've got a chart in one of my briefings where we kind of have the highlights of the last 20 years of all the inventions that have come out of space vehicles, and it's really kind of a humbling chart to look at all these great innovations. But if I can kind of collapse them into a few themes, I do think the theme that has, so I have a pervasives group which works on the components of a satellite. And I do think that's been a huge victory for us over the past, say, 20 years, in that the satellite components have been so improved, and basically, in many cases for small satellites, commoditized, so that the prices come down by a factor of 99%, basically, and the performance has gone up. So small sats act like big sats. I do think those breakthroughs in those areas have enabled this second space renaissance that we're seeing on the commercial side of things. So I am very proud of our group that has made all of those improvements over the years, from the solar panels to the deployable structures and the thermal management, just all the basic components of a satellite. The breakthroughs in those areas have really enabled this second space renaissance, and they've enabled the Pleo architectures that we're seeing now. And I do think that's one of those perhaps the second really important victory, which is proliferated low Earth orbit, this constellation. So like what SpaceX is building out, with thousands of satellites, is not something that we even envisioned or thought was possible, 20 years ago. And if you went to the the cost estimators and said, I want to build 1,000 satellites, I mean, they would just be like, give you an estimate, a cost estimate that was completely unthinkable. But commercial guys proved us wrong about that. And they have really built out some of these architectures, which have some very important strategic advantages for the Space Force. And so to have that as an option on the table, it's one of the other, perhaps the second thing that I'm most pleased that the lab has been able to produce, is that we have those options, and that some of those architectures are being built out by the Space Development Agency and by commercial providers. And then there's this issue of tactical ISR. We again,
our favorite.
Again, our vision for ISR is the same as our vision for space domain awareness, which is, we want to know everything everywhere all the time in real time. That used to be unthinkable. That is no longer unthinkable. And we used to do a lot of in the Air Force, a lot of these missions like GMTI and AMTI from airplanes, AWACS, JSTARS. Those things can now be done from space. And so those things should be done from space, and doing them from space has great competitive advantage for our nation. And so to be able to enable those new missions in space, and to be able to enable this move into tactical ISR for the Space Force, I think is perhaps the third, very significant accomplishment for the lab that I would want to highlight. And on the commercial side of things too, there's now so many commercial providers, and aggregating those together to be able to deliver products, operationally useful products, unclassified, on a meaningful timeline, has great strategic value to our COCOMs. So, there used to be, I think we've reached a point where these products and services have become so commoditized that it isn't unthinkable to have many different providers of ISR. There used to be one supercomputer, and when there was one supercomputer, you needed someone to manage that supercomputer and allocate the time very carefully in a very centralized manner. And now I've got more computing power on my watch than in that one supercomputer that we used to have. And so my watch may be very inefficient in that it's spending most of its time not doing useful tasks, but boy, is it effective. And so having a more distributed ISR, meaning not centrally managed, but managed at the tactical level by the soldier on the ground, by the people that actually need it, is definitely the future, because it's just like computers. Everybody's got one now. In the future, everyone will have all the ISR that they need as it becomes a commoditized product. So if that's our future, then my thought is, okay, how do I envision the Space Force unique elements of that, and how do I ensure the integrity of that data when it's kind of a variable, it's certainly a variable trust environment. Those are some of the technical challenges that we're trying to tackle to enable that future where you do have ubiquitous ISR. So that, I think, would be the third thing that I would highlight, that we have enabled that future, and we'll see where that goes.
You remind me back 40 years ago when I was sitting probably in the same building you're sitting in right now at AFRL. Right across the parking lot was a building, I can't remember the number, but it's probably 450 or something, where we had one supercomputer where we did all the fluid dynamic calculations for it. So that is exactly the case. I want to continue on this ISR discussion that you just started, Eric, because I think it is critically important. And there's an interesting dynamic going on right now. I'd love to get your opinion on it. I don't think there's a right answer here, but the Army is obviously very focused on on long-range fires, and they believe that they need to get into space and to do tactical ISR for that. You articulated, and General Raymond clearly gave Claire Grayson responsibility to do tactical ISR. Many of us who've been around for decades would say that the NRO always felt like that was their job to do. Is this another area where chaos is good, or is this something where we think we should organize this in a more disciplined fashion?
Well, I think we're going through a period of change, and the change is being driven by the threat, because they're certainly operating and evolving very quickly, and we need to be able to operate and evolve our own side of things very quickly. It's being driven by the technology, like I talked about. I mean, a ISR satellite is kind of like a supercomputer of yesterday, in that now everybody can have one because they're so inexpensive. And of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that's clearly where we're headed. So the technology is leading to this period of change where you've got many more players in this world, and really there's no place to hide in the world. There's so many ISR satellites nowadays. We're going through those two, at least those two changes that I think are driving us to a new future. And so when you are experiencing a lot of change, it's very dangerous to try to pick, the one future answer of where you're going to end up when there's a lot of uncertainty in any one of those answers. So a logical way to counter all of those competing ideas and threats and technologies, I think, is to have a few different people working on the problem and different technology approaches. So I would go back to the same way that we're trying to tackle it on the S&T side, where a little bit of controlled chaos can be in our benefit. And so I think of it as controlled competition, maybe, instead of chaos. It doesn't have to be chaotic so much as it has to be, let's not pretend we can pick one winner for 10, 15 years down the road. We can't do that in any of these mission areas. So we need to kind of have a strategy that's going to, hedge our bets and do a little bit of this and do a little bit of that. And if this works out, do a little more of that. That kind of agility in our future in processes, that's a war-winning strategy. And so we need to reform the requirements process. We need to reform the budgeting process. I mean, this is not just a technology problem, but at least people are talking about those things. And those are really productive discussions. So as we go down the road of acquisition reform and with those other two elements, I think that this need to have an uncertain future, and then how do we address that uncertain future, is a very important thing for us to think and talk about. And as a lab, I'm trying to enable that kind of a future where we can do that in a perhaps a less centralized way than we have in the past.
Mm-hmm. You and I have spoken before about the fact that AFRL SV RV is still part of Air Force Research Lab, even though you're sort of devoted to the Space Force, and you're kind of got a, I think the last time you showed me a wiring diagram, you had 5 bosses or something like that, which is at least 5 too many. But really, to that point, is there are other elements of AFRL that could be very important in what you've just talked about. For example, in this ISR problem, the problem may not become the satellites, but what are you going to do with all the data? How do you bring it all together and things like that? How do you coordinate amongst other elements of AFRL that allow you to get at those kind of problems?
This has been such an amazing past 18 months since we stood up the Space Force, from my perspective, in that regard. Because after we stood up the Space Force, a couple things happened. General Raymond pulled us together and said, okay, this has finally happened. Here's your clean sheet of paper. Go figure out how this Space Force should work. We are unencumbered by the past. We want to, certainly not throw away good things from the past, but we can do things differently. Okay, that's really was a really empowering vision that he laid out for us. Then we started talking about, okay, well, what does this mean for AFRL, and how are we have provided space technology to the Air Force for decades, of course, and how are we going to continue to do that and provide that to the new Space Force that's out there? And we looked at all kinds of different COAs, and it didn't take very long to settle on the idea of one AFRL, 2 services, which means that there are a lot of great synergies that we get within AFRL, because a lot of technologies are applicable to both the air domain, space domain, cyber domain, and we don't want to lose that. We don't want to create all these barriers between the different directorates within AFRL and these different technologies, because we think there's a lot of benefit that we see today. So then we made that decision. And then my boss, General Pringle, came in and made one AFRL 2 services, one of her top 3 leader priority or commander priorities. And after that, I got 9 calls from 9 other directors saying, hey, tell me more about this space stuff. How can we work together? Which was exactly the desired effect. And so it's been really good working with, sensors, materials, cyber, all of the other directorates that are out there to figure out how they can bring their technologies, which might have been developed for the air domain, to the space domain, and vice versa. And so I think that we are seeing what we've seen play out has been very exciting to me, and really beyond my expectations in terms of the benefits of having this kind of collaboration within the lab. Now, we still have our customers out at the program office and the users that are out in the Space Force. And so it's also an opportunity to tighten those relationships. And as we stood up a deputy TEO for space here within the lab that was specifically focused on, okay, how do we tighten up those relationships and make sure that we are still getting strong pull from the users and from the program offices in terms of the technology that we need, as well as informing them about what the art of the possible is and what some of these new things are. So it's been a really interesting 18 months in terms of how that has all evolved. And so far, I think it's been very positive, and it has really been a force multiplier in terms of the amount of technology that we're able to deliver per dollar spent for the Space Force.
Eric, I talked about earlier the fact that you and I really had the great pleasure of working together on ORS-1, which was driven by a JUON from CENTCOM, quite frankly, at the time. And I wonder, and I don't think we even use JUONs anymore. I think they've eliminated them from the vernacular, but there's something similar to that, I think, in there. So do you guys still, or does this go over to the Space RCO? Who gets these Cocom requirements? How do you sort them out? And are you guys still pursuing those kind of things?
Definitely. I mean, we just wrapped up a big project to outfit the hardware and software at the National Space Defense Center up in Colorado Springs, working with RI and with the DAF RCO on that project, and it's now transitioning to SMC or soon to be SSC there as one example. So we still have those kind of things that come up, and it's a great way to rally the right experts together to build out the systems that are urgent needs. Now, I do chuckle a little bit about because most of these things that come up as urgent needs are really chronic needs in that we've known about them for a long time, but we haven't, for whatever reason, sufficiently addressed them through the normal processes. But that doesn't mean they're not urgent, because they are urgent because they've been unaddressed for a long time. And so that gets back to the importance of having some technologies in the pipelines that are ready to be quickly fielded once these urgent needs come down. So I don't think that is the best way to deal with our needs and our needed capabilities, but it is one of the tools in the toolbox, and it is still out there, and we do still respond to those when we need to for unexpected needs.
So it sounds like you're in the same position as most emergency room physicians. Most of the folks that end up in the emergency room aren't an urgent need; they're a chronic need that's become urgent. So
that's exactly right. I will mention too, we have a very kind of an exciting project that we have started now with the Space Systems Command called Space Safari. And so Space Safari is modeled after the big Safari over in the airplane side of things, in that they can quickly respond to unexpected needs in the air domain, and basically bolt things on airplanes quickly and then go fly and deploy them. And that was something that General J.T. Thompson, when he got out to SMC, he said, hey, how come I don't have a big Safari like I had over on the air side of things? And I think I really need one. And he was right. That has turned out to be great. Our role in AFRL as part of that is to be kind of the organic supplier of that, in that sometimes the fastest way to get something is to build it yourself rather than contract it out and incur all those delays. And so when they choose to do it that way, can have the people that can build the satellites and assemble the sensors and stuff to quickly respond to unexpected needs in that way. So Space Safari, again, I think is an exciting new thing that we have started to work on with SSC.
Excellent, excellent. So let me ask you maybe the final question, unless some more questions come in from any of the viewers, but I don't see any right now. But let me ask you a question, and this is probably a little bit tough one. So you'll probably have read the editorial that that Congressman Cooper wrote in War on the Rocks a couple of weeks ago. Basically, and I'll just paraphrase what he said. He said, you know, look, it's been 2 years since we have a Space Force. And when I asked the questions again today that I asked yesterday, like, what are we going to do to respond to an attack in space, I get the same blank stares. It's not exactly how he put it, but it's sort of what he meant by it. How do you, not that you need to give me an answer for that question, but how do you view this this need to respond in space, to go ahead and make sure that we have the right tools? Are we in your opinion, are we moving there and we're going to be able to tell the congressman in 4 or 5 years, look, it took us a little while, obviously, but we've got this, we're on the right track, or do we need to change?
Well, I will say that, you know, someone who I have known for a long while laid out a great mission assurance taxonomy several years ago that tells us how we get to where we need to go. And so what we need to do is pursue each of those lines of effort to get us to a more resilient space architecture. And we have done much better at some of those activities than at others. And, you know, we do need to accelerate the pace of proliferation and moving to the resilient, the hybrid architecture, if we really want to be able to answer the Congress's very fair questions about what are we doing to make our space assets, our space capabilities, not necessarily any one asset, but our space capabilities more resilient and less vulnerable. So like many, and like General Raymond, I think I am disappointed at the pace at which we've been able to move to a more resilient space architecture. But there are a lot of factors to consider, and we are not just starting from nothing. We're starting from some great capabilities that we have today, and there's a lot of thought that needs to go into how do you evolve those into the future. So appreciating all of those complexities, I think my job in the lab is to lower the risk of moving to that new architecture. So that's where I'm focused on, is to show people that it's really not so scary to do this new stuff. In fact, we have to do this new stuff if we want to stay ahead of our competition and make sure that our space capabilities are there when we need them the most and when our warfighters need them the most. So I think that is my role in accelerating change, is to burn down the technical risks and show that we actually can do some of these future things. Proliferated LEO is a great example where there are some risks in moving to that kind of an architecture as one element of the architecture, not as the only thing. And I can help burn down those risks. So I guess I would share his frustration. I'm talking about the congressman's frustration. But I'm trying to do everything I can to enable those different alternative future architectures, and then work with the SWAC and the Space Force to implement them in a logical way that balances the needs of tonight. You know, we need to be able to deter China tonight, no doubt about that. But we also need to be able to deter China in 2030 and 2035. And I would argue that we're putting a little bit too much emphasis on the near term, and we need to have a more balanced investment strategy that also looks at these longer term things, or we're going to find ourselves in a future we don't like very well when we get there in 2030. So I guess those would be my thoughts, is that we need to move faster, but we need to move more strategically in having more investment in the longer term technologies that are going to really make a big difference for our nation and are at least as important as the fight tonight.
That's great. I will tell you, I agree with you. You know, I promise you that was the last question, but I'm gonna give you a softball as the one last question. How can we in industry help you to get your job done?
So I really think industry is doing a great job at innovating and pursuing new capabilities in space, and that's the key. We need to keep doing more of that. And by industry, I don't just mean the traditional primes. I don't just mean the new space companies. I mean industry in general. We have a great investment environment in space right now, in that the money is flowing well to to companies with good ideas, and sometimes to companies who are building the 138th launch provider. So that's all good in that we are investing in new things in space, and I need industry to keep innovating and keep doing that. Need industry to keep pursuing commercial opportunities in space, not just government dollars. So the best models are ones where there's a great commercial market, and oh, by the way, the government can augment it, shape it a little bit, keep those things domestic rather than shifting to China or some foreign competitor. That's the best possible market. So more of that, more innovation, more pursuing commercial opportunities in space. As we open space up for development and all this commercial, there's money to be made in space. And so as that all opens up and the Space Force adopts the role of protecting and defending the space lines of commerce, that's really the model that we need to evolve towards as we move to the future. So I guess I would ask from industry, keep innovating, keep doing new stuff. If you need, keep collaborating with us on customer discovery and what are the ideas worth pursuing. We probably, we don't need to throw all of our money in one direction when there's a whole bunch of different things that need to be pursued in parallel. So I think industry is doing a good job of that. I want to see that continue. I want to see those companies be very successful and profitable and stay in the U.S. And I just want to watch all of that play out. I want to do our part in government to help continue to facilitate that, to help with the bureaucracy and minimizing the onerous regulations that might be holding us back or driving some to other nations. So I think we just keep going, but not in it, but in a deliberate fashion that's aware of the vision that we're trying to get to as a nation, and that there is a very big role for commercial to play that is even independent of the government, except that the government enables it. So please, more of that, and let's keep going. Let's make I would like 2030 to be an even more exciting time to be working in space than right now. Right now is super exciting, but think of what could be there as we get all kinds of, human settlement, commercial mining, solar power being, there's so many opportunities out there in the future that are very exciting. And that's going to make it even better 5-10 years from now.
Gosh, I don't know if I can take any more excitement at this stage, Eric. Hey, Eric, listen, the time has flown by. What a great conversation, and some great insights you have given us today. I think this has been, I know for me, very enlightening, and I'm sure for everybody who's on the call. Thank you for taking the time out of your overly busy schedule to do this for us. The whole National Security Space Association clearly is in your debt for this. And again, if there's anything we can do to help, please let us know. And we will look forward to seeing you. Personally, I will not be out at the Space Symposium, but maybe you'll be down at Amos and we can see each other down there. Hawaii is better anyway.
I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. And this doesn't have to be the end of the dialogue. Let's keep talking and keep collaborating and keep ideating together. It's been great to be here today, and I always enjoy these kind of events. So thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Eric, and we'll say goodbye now. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.